We all have lived through the largest economic downfall since the Great Depression of 1929, but how many of us really understand the events that led up to and caused the 2008 financial crisis? My name is Jenna Riesacker, and for the past couple years I've been an accounting student and have had experience working in the accounting industry. Because of this, I've seen firsthand how the 2008 financial crisis is still affecting our economy today. To inform you of some of these key events is my primary purpose for this speech, and I want you to know really specifically some new knowledge regarding how the 2008 financial crisis came to be and how it happened in the first place. In this speech specifically, I'm going to speak about how lowering the federal funds rate, issuing subprime mortgages and collateral debt obligations, and the deregulation of Wall Street ultimately all led to the 2008 financial crisis. The beginning of this crisis was started by the Federal Reserve decreasing the federal funds rate from 6.5% in 2000 to 1% in 2003. This was in response to the burst of the dot-com bubble, corporate accounting scandals such as Enron, and the 9/11 terrorist attacks on the US. Borrowers took advantage of these newly decreased rates with a massive increase in mortgage loans. Once this asset bubble of homeownership began to increase and increase some more, and finally, when it was at its peak, the Federal Reserve decided to increase the federal funds rate again. This then presented some major problems for a lot of the borrowers that were considered subprime. Next, the housing bubble caused more and more lenders to be offering subprime mortgages and selling hedge funds these intangible packages of mortgages and derivatives known as collateral debt obligations. Essentially, because of this, anyone could get a mortgage regardless of their credit rating. And while that may seem like a good thing for the economy, it was really detrimental. Mortgages issued to the individuals with poor credit scores were known as subprime mortgages, and these were included in these ever increasingly popular collateral debt obligations, which placed all of the risk on the investor and none of the risk on the banks or the large wealthy hedge funds. I have an Investopedia quote here that talks about this, and it says, "By combining the risk from debt instruments, CDOs make it possible to recycle risky debt into AAA-rated bonds that are considered safe for retirement investing and meeting reserve capital requirements." Essentially, what this large wordy paragraph means is that now hedge funds were allowed to sneak in these junk investments that were these subprime mortgages into collateral debt obligations and market them as perfectly safe AAA-rated investments. This was not only highly unethical, but these funds got away with it for years, until it finally decided to crash the economy when the Federal Reserve increased the federal funds rate again. Because of this, the subprime homeowners defaulted on their mortgages, and these CDOs were rendered completely worthless. Finally, the years of financial industry deregulation from the government allowed banks and hedge funds to get away with unethical practices associated with subprime mortgages and collateral debt obligations. In 1999, the Glass-Steagall Act of 1933 was repealed, which allowed banks to use deposits as derivatives for CDOs as long as these securities were considered low risk. However, we know that they did not keep this promise, as these subprime mortgages were snuck into these investments and still marketed as AAA-rated investments. Repealing the Glass-Steagall Act of 1933 was actually backed by lobbyists from Enron. I spoke a little bit about them earlier when talking about some of these corporate accounting scandals that were going on at the time. And essentially, repealing the Glass-Steagall Act has been backed since the beginning by unethical practices. Overall, the 2008 financial crisis was caused by the federal funds rate decreasing, the massive issuance of subprime mortgages and collateral debt obligations, and finally, the widespread deregulation from repealing the Glass-Steagall Act of 1933. Thankfully, we now have the Dodd-Frank Act that protects consumers and led to massive reform on Wall Street. I hope you learned a little bit more today about the events that led up to the 2008 financial crisis and how it came to be, and thank you for listening.